Hey everyone, welcome back to the Craft Parenting Podcast, a podcast about two Cincinnati craft beer lovers with a severe parenting problem. I know we say that every week.
It'll get better, right?
But it's especially true this week, as Lily recently learned how to climb out of her pack and play.
And so, when she napped today, she napped on the floor, of her own volition. She pulled her pillow and blankets onto the floor, napped on the floor next to her bed. Sweet, that's fine, you can do that. But she just keeps getting up. So fingers crossed, she's down for the count this time.
Yeah, so she is sleeping in her big girl toddler bed, which is basically a twin bed that is low to the ground.
No, it's a crib
right?
mattress.
Oh, it's a crib mattress, but it's just, okay. That's low to the ground, whatever.
So it's safer for her to get in and out of.
Yeah, and her bookshelf is mounted to the wall. We did do that. We were good parents.
Yeah, and her dresser isn't going anywhere. That thing was made before time itself.
It's not top heavy or anything like that, so we're pretty confident in that. But last night, Lily randomly started. She was downstairs, but she couldn't go anywhere because all the gates were closed. And she just was like, Daddy. She was sleepwalking, but not really. And
you're like, well, I guess I'll go take care of it. And I'm like, and then I just completely passed back out.
Yeah, and you didn't get to see me army crawl out of her room as I did tonight as well.
It works.
Anyway, thanks so much for being here. My name is Joe Ludwig, and with me is my lovely wife and co-host, Caroline.
What up, what up? I will never probably do that again.
How's it going, Caroline?
I mean, I'm drinking a really yummy beer, so I'm down for it.
Yeah, we'll get into that very shortly. We have yummy beers all around. Big beers.
Well, we had to celebrate in style. Or we had to are we supposed to drink beer the next part of the series? I mean, are we supposed to drink water the next part of the series? I'm not going to, though. Maybe I'll bring out the ice wine for that one. Just keep upping the ABV.
But to piggyback off that, we have another great show planned out this week. We are going to talk about
Prohibition.
Pre-Prohibition.
In Cincinnati.
The road to Prohibition in the Cincinnati area.
Yes.
And these factoids that you are going to tell me are based on a book that you have been reading.
That is correct. For an undisclosed amount of time, I have had Cincinnati Beer by Michael D. Morgan out from the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. Shout out to the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, who have decided that they are no longer going to put hard due dates on things. They just kind of keep renewing stuff indefinitely, and have now resorted to pictures of adorable kids returning books to try to guilt you into returning your books.
Wow. Yeah, at what point is this theft of public property?
I mean, my taxes paid for it, so it's partially mine. I'm gonna return it, I swear.
So we'll get into all that and more in this week's episode. This is episode 45.
Oh my goodness.
We have been doing this more than 45 times because we have an episode 0.
Yes. And we had to record an episode twice, which might have been episode 0 because we lost it.
Yeah, we lost episode 0 and we have a trailer. So, but as far as, that's not really an episode, but as far as episodes go, we started at episode 0.
So really this is episode 46, but we call it episode 45. We probably just don't want to dig into this.
Yeah.
We need to get to the first part of our 5-part trilogy,
where we replace the main character with someone younger 20 years later.
That's the way to do it.
All right, well, let's get into it. As previously mentioned, you have an adult beverage in front of you.
I do. And upon further research, this is an adult beverage from July of 2019.
So this is a beverage 3 years in the making.
I purchased it when I was super mega pregnant with Lily. I think I recall going to Brink when I picked this up because I was like, do you want to see my ID? I'm super mega pregnant, but do you want to see my ID? It's like, I'm not drinking any of this right now.
They said yes, I think.
I'm pretty sure they did too.
So good on you. But I won't spoil what it is. You tell us what you're drinking.
Yes. So I am drinking Street Corner Thieves by Brink Brewing Company. It is a raspberry vanilla Russian Imperial Stout, which has an ABV of 10.15%. So a lot of the raspberry and vanilla has kind of dropped off because, again, it's been like 2.5 years. And those are kind of the first flavors that start to go. But it's super smooth, and I can get a little bit of that bourbon in it. And like probably letting this sit around for this length of time was not the best decision. But I am so glad that I'm drinking this beer. Wish I would have drank it in July of 2019, but super mega pregnant was not going to do that.
Yeah.
So their description is, Street Corner Thieves is a blend of our Street Corner Karate and Barrel Thieves and Hired Guns Russian Imperial Stout collaborations. We took the best of both beers and blended them together in a bourbon barrel and then added vanilla beans and 44 pounds of raspberries. The beer was allowed to age in the barrel for 9 months. Flavors of fresh raspberries and subtle vanilla mingle with roasty, chocolatey stout. I am a fan. I would like more of this, but there is no more of this. Is this the beer that Larry drank after he mowed the lawn one day? No, we don't think it is.
No, I think no.
Maybe he grabbed an Easter candy or something like that. I don't know.
No, I'm pretty sure we have one of those left still.
We probably do.
But I took a sip of this beer after I put Lily down.
It's so good.
You said there was no raspberry, but all I got was tart.
I mean, I get some tart, but it's not like a sour tart. Like, it's not Urban Artifact tart.
No, that's all I got from that beer.
But we've discussed this previously on the podcast. You are not a fan of Urban Artifact just because you don't really get behind sour beers, which is fine. I love me a good sour. This isn't sour to me.
Tastes sour to me.
Well, what are you drinking? Because it's obviously not a Street Corner Thieves.
No, it is not, because, as you said, that might be the only one in existence at the moment.
It might be.
Unless they're making more.
I'm sure some craft beer nerd has one in his, oh my goodness, the thing with cellar. Yes. Words, hard, beer, good.
I am drinking, speaking of big beer, I am drinking a cold brew Imperial Stout by Westside Brewing. They released this on Black Friday this year, so 2021. And it is 11.2%, and the IBU is 62. So it's a bit higher in both ABV and IBUs than I typically drink. I don't think I've ever had a beer that was over 10% that wasn't barrel aged. Maybe Chacao, that's a little bit over 10%.
I mean, it's not exactly the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, usually if it's high ABV, it's barrel aged.
Yeah.
And it's not impossible.
No, it's not impossible. It's just less probable.
And just the stuff that I drink, right? I don't really go for a triple IPA or whatever that might clock at over 10% or whatever. But usually the stuff, as I said, the stuff that I drink, I guess that's what I'm getting to. Usually the stuff that I drink that has a high ABV is barrel aged, but this is not barrel aged. And like as I've said previously, I usually go for the malty dark beers, which this is definitely dark and malty for sure, but it's also kind of bitter, and that comes from the coffee.
Well, and you love you some cold brew coffee.
I do, but I have a rocky relationship with coffee beers.
This is true.
I think I was at Brink it was a couple years ago. I think.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
The Father G's Bees coffee.
I love Father G's Bees. It's is it a honey brown?
It is a honey brown ale. One time they put coffee in it, and now every single time I get it. Actually, I think I stopped asking, but up until like 3 months ago, I was confirming that there were no adjuncts in Father G's Bees, because one time
I ordered it, and Father G's Bees, it has honey in it from bees that Father G's actually, he harvests the honey from the bees, and it's all local and stuff. Honey is really sweet. Coffee is really bitter. So I can see where you can combine the two for a unique flavor. But if you're used to...
someone.
If you're used to a beer that's kind of sweet and then you don't tell them that it has coffee in it,
it was a discombobulating experience.
It was, yeah. It kind of jolts you. Like, this isn't what I'm used to. Just fine. I mean, but just they didn't say coffee on the board. Let's put it that way.
Well, their board doesn't have a lot of room for stuff like that either, so.
No, but the bartender didn't warn me. Hey, by the way, this isn't normal Father G's. But once I got over that hump of, oh, this has coffee in it, it was decent. It was pretty good, but I don't think, as you said, I don't think they've done it since. And this was a good 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, it was definitely pre-Lily. It was BC, before children.
But the description that I have for this cold brew imperial stout, it is made with Deeper Roots coffee, Deeper Roots cold brew to be exact. So the description is, we infused our imperial stout with some cold brewed coffee from local roaster Deeper Roots. The roasty aromas of coffee meld with the beer's notes of chocolate, raisins, roast, and a light peppery note. More coffee leads the flavor with sweet malt flavors of dark fruit before being carried away by roast and ending in a fairly dry finish that keeps this beer drinkable. I don't know about drinkable. I think for me, this is a one and done situation. And I actually drank this pretty quickly.
Well, I think most of that has to do with the fact that we are pretty cognizant of craft beer and what our limits are when it comes to drinking craft beer. So we know, okay, this is a one and done. Like, I'm not going to do anything else tonight but drink this one beer. I might drink it in 20 minutes.
I did. Well, no, I've been drinking this over the last hour.
Okay, but like it's going to be this one beer and that's going to be it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm not going to be driving.
Nope.
And I pre-gamed with some water too. So, yeah, I don't know about drinkable, but then again, I did drink this relatively quick. The first time I had this, I drank it over like 3-hour time span. So you drink it quicker than that. It's very, very delicious. I don't know if they have any left. You recently just went to West Side?
I got more, so they do still have some left.
But that was a week ago at this point, so...
Yeah, that was a little while. That was a hot second ago. But like they still had Missing Link, because I picked up Missing Link. So maybe they do. And I guess we might have to decide whether or not we're going to be nice, and if we have an extra Krampus coal that we can throw the gnomes away. I don't know, though. I really like Krampus coal. I don't know if I want to share.
We don't know the gnome. What are you going to do, text him?
I could Instagram him. I can be outgoing.
He might have gotten some by now.
I don't know. I can ask Julia or I can ask the gnome, but I'd have to check our fridge first. And that requires going downstairs. That's too much work.
All right. So that is what we are drinking this week. So now it is time for What is Bugging Caroline in Children's TV, where you, Caroline, tell us all about the lack of physics and
logic
in children's TV.
So this week, Goofy goofed up and he made all of the storybooks disappear, so the Clubhouse gang couldn't have a bedtime story. So he goes to the magical land of fairy tales, because, again, he goofed up, so he's the only one that's able to go, to find a book the book is yellow and it shows, or no, the book is golden. The book is golden and it shows a heart, a diamond, and my nose. Well, it's really a rose, but Goofy sings different words that rhyme with rose. It's adorable. So he's going through essentially different fairy tale stories while he's in this fairy tale land. And one of them is Hansel and Gretel. And oh, hey, the witch is actually good. She's trying to make treats to share with all of the children. Okay, that's good, but now you're kind of teaching my child to accept candy from strangers. And okay, free candy, but we really shouldn't do that. Though, full disclosure, I would tell my children, yes, take the candy, don't eat it, go sell it to someone else, make profit, run away.
What?
I mean, not really, but
The only thing missing from this episode, and it was a 2-part episode, so there is more.
there is more.
To what we saw tonight, because we just literally just watched it with the kids. The only thing that was missing was a windowless van.
I mean, so there's a pretty funny internet story where it's a husband and basically his wife has been datelined and the police are showing him.
Wait, what does that mean?
So his wife has been kidnapped and he's like, oh no, my wife watches a lot of Dateline. She's a lot smarter than that. This would not happen to her. And they're like, the woman who ended up getting your wife, we have camera footage, security camera footage from this parking lot. The woman who got your wife to go into the van had a baby goat in pajamas. And he's like, well, yep, she's screwed. Okay, I now understand why she went baby goat in pajamas. Promise of more baby goats in pajamas. And then there's another internet story, which
is this a real story, or
that one's a made up story. This one is potentially a true story, or it could also be made up because it's the internet. Where it's a woman and she's hanging out at the park. And a woman has a puppy and she's like, oh, that's a cute puppy. And she pets the puppy. And the woman's like, I have all of their siblings in my car. You want to come see them? And she's like, yeah. So she goes to this woman's car and sees the puppies and pets the puppies and interacts with the puppies and then goes about her way and gets home and realizes, I totally would have just fallen for that and gotten kidnapped if that was an option of the evening. And I'm like, odds are low that would happen to me, but it could happen.
So is that everything that's bugging you this week?
Yeah, don't teach my children that witches in forests making sweet treats are to be trusted, because no, don't trust them.
So, Caroline, what are we talking about this week?
As teased in multiple episodes of the Craft Parenting podcast.
All 45.
A lot of them, it's been a while. I don't remember what exactly was going on. If there was an episode of Cincy Brewcast where Michael D. Morgan was on, or I was just thinking about different episode topics we could have and how cool the second half of the Cincinnati Brewery tour that we saw was, plus my beer class experience in UC and actually doing the full tour, how ingrained Cincinnati was in beer, and then just bam, it's gone. And now we're trying to get that history back.
The legacy back.
Yeah, the legacy back, and trying to dominate the United States craft beer scene, which I would argue that we are, but per usual, everybody's like, Cincinnati, nothing ever happens in Cincinnati. Who would want to go to Cincinnati?
Yeah.
Our cost of living is really low, and our beer is really, really good. So maybe think about it.
Cincinnati is not us. It's if New York and Chicago and LA is an A city, we're a C city.
Yeah.
Right? So a third tier city or whatever. Low cost of living, like you said. Not huge, but not small.
Yeah. And I learned this in college and then promptly forgot most of it. Cincinnati is within a 8 or 12 hour drive of 60% of the continental United States.
Yeah, that tracks with a lot of the stats that I saw in some of the marketing brochures that I did in my previous work.
Yeah, so Cincinnati is very centrally located, but we're a very weird city. Is the Mark Twain quote is I want to die in Cincinnati because everything happens 20 years later there. That's not the exact quote. I can look it up, but
I don't know about that. But Cincinnati, I mean, there's a lot of history in Cincinnati that some people may not recognize. I don't know the exact stat, but it's something crazy. We were exporting like 90% of the beer and of the world's beer or something.
So it was something crazy like, and I haven't found that stat in this book because I definitely would have sent it to you like 20 times. But from what I can recall being told, it's like pre-Prohibition, Cincinnati was making like half of the beer of the entire country.
Of the U.S.
Of the United
world.
States. Yeah, of the country.
Sorry.
But
not the world.
No one really knew it because Cincinnatians were drinking 2/3 of that. Plus whatever beer was being imported into Cincinnati, whether from the States or from other countries. So Cincinnatians drank a lot of beer, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
And then there's the legend of Carrie.
Yes.
Of what's her face?
Carrie Nation.
Carrie Nation, where she was a prohibitioner. She was someone who
She was a leader in the temperance movement.
Oh, is that what the temperance movement?
Yep.
Whatever. So she was a activist in the temperance movement, and she was famous for taking a hatchet to kegs of beer.
Yep. She would just go through saloons and start taking a hatchet to their beer.
And the legend, the rumor, I don't know if there's any historical proof of this, but the rumor was that she came to Cincinnati, right before Prohibition happened, so like the late 1800s or whatever. And she
got to the end of Vine Street.
She got to Vine Street, which is the main thoroughway, one of the main thoroughways through over the Rhine, where all the Germans were. And she was like, well, screw this, because
I'll drop down from exhaustion before I make it like down a block.
Because every other building was a bar.
Every other door, not even building, every other door.
Every other door was a bar of some kind, a bar or a brewery or a saloon, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So she just, and then she left.
She was like, peace out, Cincinnati.
She left too. She says she couldn't even keep up with all the Germans and their beer. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the road to Prohibition in Cincinnati. Let's go back in time.
Let's go back in time. So, by the beginning of the 1900s, breweries were running amok in Cincinnati. Temperance advocates blamed alcohol for the rising crime rates, domestic abuse, vagrants, prostitution, and political corruption. Yeah. And while it may have only been partially true, by the late 1800s, Cincinnati had way too many saloons, and it took a while for breweries to recognize that that was in fact a problem and to attempt to fix it. So going back in time a little bit more, in 1851, Maine was the first state to pass a prohibition law. Ohio was a long ways away from being able to do the same. But the Ohio temperance movement decided to start by eradicating saloons. Of course, this would keep alcohol out of the hands of the poor masses, so this should be how we should fix this. We're just going to make saloons illegal. But in order to do this, they would need to pass a constitutional amendment and broad statewide legislation, which would mean they need a lot of people to get behind this. Or at least the majority of the people who came out to vote that day to get behind this. They got the laws passed like they wanted, but the way things went in the end was not even close to the way that they planned them out. In 1851, they passed a law to eliminate the tavern and saloon licensing system. Licensing is hard to say when you've had 3/4 of a beer. So this amendment to the Ohio Constitution made it so local municipalities could no longer issue liquor licenses to prospective business owners, nor could they regulate or tax them.
Good.
I mean, so yeah, you can't operate because we can't regulate you anymore. So thanks to that new law that they passed, the assembly was also able to prohibit the sale of alcohol for on-site consumption. Per the temperance movement's logic, now all alcoholic sales were illegal, and all bars, saloons, and other places of alcoholic consumption would have to close or change their business plan. In reality, it meant that owners no longer had to pay taxes, acquire a license to operate, or have any true regulations.
I'm listening.
Surprised Pikachu face by the temperance movement, because some small or rural taverns in conservative parts of the state closed because people in the area were like, yeah, you need to shut down. These laws exist. We don't want to drink. It's evil. Make it go away. But in large cities, not much changed other than they were no longer able to get tax revenue from the still open businesses. Because I can't regulate or tax you. Therefore, hey, I got the saloon. I had to pay taxes every year. Guess what? I don't have that expense anymore. That's money in my pockets.
Taxation is theft.
Exactly.
I love it.
And so not much change in large cities. And at the time the law went into effect, there were fewer police officers in Cincinnati than there were saloons. And the voters didn't care if the police officers weren't enforcing the new laws because they're like, I'm going to go drink. You want to come drink next to me, but you're not going to shut this place down. So it's like, surprise Pikachu face. This did not do what we thought it was going to do.
So the free market worked its magic, and savvy business owners took advantage of it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I don't have to get a license to open up a saloon. Well, if I think I might have talked about this later. I'm going to talk about that next. So we're going to get into that next. So because starting a business in the late 1800s could be expensive, and breweries and business owners had found a mutually beneficial way to run businesses. The brewery would give the business owner startup capital, and the business would exclusively sell their beer. This caused the number of saloons to increase to approximately 2,000, and the number of businesses that sold alcoholic beverages went up to about 1,400 by 1890. So math those together, that's about 3,400 businesses in Cincinnati, or even we'll say Hamilton County, that were selling alcohol for on-site consumption.
Which, if you're in the temperance movement, you're like, what?
What did I just do? So up until this point, breweries denied that they were in fact the problem. Like, hey, I'm helping this small business open by giving them the startup capital. They just kind of have to sell my beer on the side as part of me giving them the startup capital. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So breweries were helping business owners all across the city, and by 1881, it was estimated that brewers owned 1/5 of the city's saloons. The brewery would own the property, and whoever rented it could purchase their beer from the brewery in question if they wanted to keep their lease. So, like, some leases would say, hey, you have to sell Christian Moorline beer, or you have to sell Jung beer. But sometimes they'd be like, yeah, you can rent this property and have whatever kind of business you want. But under the table, it would be, hey, you're going to have a saloon and you're going to sell my beer. So because there were so many businesses selling beer or just alcoholic beverages in general, in the 1880s, Ohio was determined to figure out how to regain their tax capital from all of the open saloons. I mean, they want their money.
Uncle Sam always comes a knocking.
Yes, he does. So they had lots of issues trying to pass laws, because the state constitution specifically said that they were unable to tax or regulate these businesses, so it was trouble getting a law to pass and then stick. In December of 1886, they finally got the Dowel Law to pass, which caused chaos across the state. Lines stretched for hours since the new law only gave businesses 4 days to pay their taxes or face fines or closure if it was going to in fact actually be enforced. So in Hamilton County, it is estimated that 2,140 saloon owners paid the tax, and of those approximately 2,100 businesses, about 30% of the fees were paid by breweries themselves. Now, part of this was because the breweries were so deeply entrenched in these businesses. And a lot of it was because profit margins of saloons were so thin, they didn't necessarily have the capital on hand to pay those taxes. But they would pay the brewery would pay the taxes, and then they would slowly pay off the brewery over the course of the year. So like the tax was $350, which it was at one point. The brewery would pay that $350, and then the saloon would slowly pay them that money back as they gained capital throughout the year. So there were about 800 to 900 businesses that didn't pay the taxes, either because they weren't sure if they were allowed to, because, hey, the state constitution says I don't have to pay taxes, or they just flat out couldn't because they didn't have the capital on hand. So thanks to the Dowel Law, in addition to letting the county get revenue from these establishments again, it allowed municipalities to vote whether or not they would allow alcohol sales on Sundays. In Cincinnati, this passed quickly, mostly because businesses were already ignoring the fact that they weren't allowed to sell on Sunday. So like Sunday, you'd go through Cincinnati, alcohol flowing in the streets. Nobody cares. We do what we want.
Yeah, that's when a lot of the Germans were in the beer gardens.
Yeah.
Drinking after church.
And when you're drinking next to the police officer, nobody cares.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So the Dowel Law did help prune some of the smaller businesses, which put a tiny dent in the number of establishments across the city, because some of the places did in fact have to close because they couldn't pay those taxes, and it did get mildly enforced.
So why is that a good thing that the state forced businesses to close?
We'll get into what some of those businesses were doing in a bit.
Oh, okay.
I think. Maybe I don't though. So we'll poke in on this now. So a lot of the smaller businesses that closed were probably mom and pop shops that didn't have a lot of side hustle income. So they were probably straight saloons, speculation. And I know I should get into this later. A lot of the bigger saloons, ones that were more profitable, I should say, versus bigger, the ones that were more profitable were way more likely to house illegal gambling or prostitution because you wouldn't necessarily make good income just on beer. So we need to find other ways to make money. And hey, what goes great with beer? Gambling and prostitution. Sweet. Let's throw them all together into one big business. And for the most part, it was just kind of looked at with a blind eye. So no one really acknowledged it.
Gotcha.
But they all knew it was happening.
But a lot of these state senators, I guess, were pro-temperance movement, which is why they passed this law.
So the first law that they passed in 1851, speculation is one of the reasons why it did in fact pass, was because savvy business owners saw, well, this means I don't have to pay taxes anymore. And I don't get regulated anymore because the state can't do that.
Oh, okay.
So they helped pass the law. And then the Dowel Law, that one was kind of the start of probably what we needed, but it was we're starting to get close to the too little, too late side of things.
What do you mean what we needed?
As far as getting rid of some of these businesses. So the free market typically says if you have like 3 furniture store companies right next to each other and they're all 3 producing the same quality of furniture, everybody's going to kind of end up pricing their stuff the same, but slowly everyone's going to lower prices to the point where they can't lower prices anymore. Or someone's going to lower their prices more than they can and then they're going to go out of business. And now it'll be a little bit easier to regulate prices. So saloons were doing it. Breweries were subsidizing saloons so much that the free market wasn't really regulating how many saloons could actually be open. So way more saloons were open than were actually needed. It was a beer bubble that wasn't going to burst because people were subsidizing all of these businesses. And the businesses were subsidized.
Was it different beer though? Or was it all the same beer?
Probably very similar beer.
Like, was it all Christian Moorline?
No, there were a few different breweries.
Yeah.
So Christian Moorline gets talked about for a bit.
Well, that's kind of what's happening now.
Yeah.
In a way. I mean, they're not saloons and they're not being subsidized, but...
So, well, there's a difference. So back in the 1800s, the brewery might not necessarily have a tap room, or they would, because they would do some private sales, but it'd be more like in London where every other pub we went to was a Nicholson's pub. We just didn't know it. So they were all kind of under the same umbrella.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you might go in and you might get Christian Moorline, or you might go in and you end up with Young Brewing, Jung. It just kind of depend on which brewers had the most places open. Young Brewing is talked about a lot in this chapter of the book because they did a lot of sketchy things.
Okay. Well, let's continue then with this story that you're laying out.
So that was approximately 1886. In 1888, the legislature voted to get rid of Sunday sales, and penalties increased for businesses who would decide to still sling drinks. The General Protective Association of Saloon Keepers, which was a organization in Cincinnati at the least, voted to ignore the law with safety in numbers, because if we all do it, they can't arrest all of us, right?
The emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
The Brewers Protective Association stated they would help by no longer selling beer to private parties on Sundays, so people would have to go to saloons. So like, we're not going to open our tap room at the brewery, so they're going to go to your saloon instead to get beer. This did work for a while, but people began to get wary of openly breaking the law, even if they did want to drink on Sundays. So by 1895, traffic at saloons was a lot slower on Sundays, with some saloons opting to not open at all because they wouldn't have as many people coming through the door anyway. But the saloons that were open were a lot quieter than they had been a decade previously. So things were calming down on Sundays, which overall was probably a good trend. That gives people a little, it doesn't necessarily give them warm fuzzies. It takes away some of the sharp pricklies. Or cold pricklies. I think cold pricklies is how we describe it at Girl Scout camp sometimes. And you're like, I have never heard this before.
No, I haven't. What is a cold?
So instead of a warm fuzzy, it's a cold prickly.
Ah.
So it's like the complete opposite.
Okay.
So fewer saloons open on Sundays, a little more enforcement starting to happen. And then a new organization, the Cincinnati, Covington, and Newport Brewers Exchange, was founded in 1897 by the area's 26 breweries. So at Cincinnati, Covington, and Newport only had 26 breweries. The reach is probably a bit further now, but we're up to almost 70 in Cincinnati. Quote, Cincinnati, quote, quote, as the gnome describes it.
Well, it goes from...
Which is like 40 miles outside from downtown Cincinnati.
Yeah, so it's not quite Dayton, but it goes up through Middletown.
Yeah. So the Brewers Exchange came up with their own regulations and held money in trust as a sign of good faith. So each brewery deposited money into this account that could then be pulled from if, hey, y'all are doing stupid stuff that you're not supposed to be doing. So this exchange decided that the breweries would no longer give saloons things for free. They wouldn't help them start their businesses or pay their taxes anymore. In addition, the collective helped regulate the size of glassware across the city and get rid of 2-for-1 or add-on free specials offered by some saloons as a competitive advantage. So pretty much across the city, the price for a pint was $5. $5 would have been crazy expensive back then, was 5 cents.
Wow.
But
nice.
What some businesses would do, well, instead of giving you a 16-ounce pint glass, I'm going to give you a 22-ounce glass, but it's still going to be 5 cents. So you're getting more for that 5 cents. Or for every beer you buy, you also get a hot dog. So now you have lunch and a beer.
Ah, okay. So it's like the Mug Club at West Side.
Yeah, but saloons are bleeding cash. So with fewer handouts from the breweries, some saloons would delve more into seedy business practices, even though others were thankful for the standards. Because some people were getting annoyed by, oh, this guy's going to sell beer for 3 cents every other day or something like that. Or I've got a beer and a hot dog, and this guy has like a beer and a roast beef sandwich.
Yikes.
So it gets hard to compete with stuff like that. So saloonists on a whole were not happy that with the reduced handouts, since they could no longer subsidize their filling lunch and 2 beers for 10 cents using the brewery's money. But brewers were happy about this turn of events because they said those business practices were economic suicide, which, I mean, they were. You can't afford to do that. And then brewers also regulated the price they sold a keg for to keep prices consistent across the city. So at the time, they determined it was like $3.50 for a barrel. And one brewery was going out of business, and the financial guy decided we're going to sell beer for $3 a barrel. And the Brewers Association is like, what? You can't do that. The price is $3.50 a barrel. And he's like, dude, I need to liquidate all of these assets. Technically, I am a bank. I am not part of your association. I'm selling them for $3 a barrel. And it's like, well, crud, we can't compete with that. So he kind of would throw a wrench in things. We covered the things that the breweries and the saloonists said, but back before the invention of the internet, it was easier to say one thing but do another. So breweries would routinely lie about how many saloons they backed and would continue to lease property that was only allowed to operate as a saloon.
Whoa. Are you saying that businesses lie?
I'm saying back in the 1800s, businesses lied.
Oh.
Now, could that correlate, and we could maybe infer that businesses will continue to lie as long as it helps their bottom line? Can't deny that. So breweries would have some legitimate property too, like apartment buildings with retail storefronts where they would have lagering cellars in the basement. And
we've seen.
Yes, which we've seen. And after these breweries closed, they would some of them would turn the ventilation shafts into garbage chutes. So they just cut a hole into the side of the ventilation shaft and shove all the garbage. Because, hey, there's a pit down here. No one cares. Throw garbage in pit. It's fine. So they did have some legitimate businesses, but they would occasionally have either flat out or under the table deals of this storefront that you're operating is going to be a saloon and it's going to be selling my beer and only my beer. So in 1899, the Ohio Brewers Association voted to ban breweries from leasing property for saloons if other states passed similar laws. Other states had already passed similar laws, but they wanted more countrywide support of the end of tied houses, which is kind of what it was called, was a tied house, because you are now tied to my house, or you're going to do this, before they would start enforcing it themselves. And part of their logic for that was that brands like Pabst and Anheuser were trying to get into Ohio, and they didn't necessarily want them to start opening up tied houses because they weren't under that Ohio Brewers Association. So the Ohio Brewers Association is like, we ain't going to do any more tied houses. But Anheuser, because they're not Anheuser-Busch at that point, Anheuser's like, I'm going to do a hot tide house because I'm not from Ohio, so I can do that. They didn't want to have to necessarily worry about that. And then Anheuser would start getting into all of these different breweries.
Gotcha. And was Anheuser out of St. Louis at this point?
Probably.
Okay.
That would sound correct.
I don't know the history of Anheuser.
This is a book about Cincinnati beer. They don't really get into it. They just specifically name Anheuser and Pabst. Going back in time a little bit to get up to where we are today, which we've covered a little bit, but after the Chicago fire of 1871, a bar owner started giving away an oyster with every beer.
Pour on water, pour on water.
Save my children, save my children. Jump, lady, jump. Huh. Girl Scout songs. So this spread across the city. I think the quote from the book is faster than the fire did, and eventually across the country. So patrons began to expect a free meal while they were drinking beer.
What is the correlation between that and the Chicago fire?
It was just something that started after the Chicago fire, probably as a like, hey, let's get some people in here. It doesn't really matter, and like he says it in here too, because like he specifically names the bar owner, but it's like if he was really the first, it didn't really matter because soon it was all across the city. But it's according to a legend. It was the free lunch promotion was born in Chicago shortly after the Great Fire of 1871.
Oh, so Chicago started it.
Chicago started it, and it then went through other American cities. But I mean, like oysters aren't gonna be popular everywhere else, so it turned into like a hot dog or a roast beef, and soon they were running promotions that were losing them money. Hence, I need to be subsidized by a brewery because like I can't afford to buy my own tap lines when I'm trying to pay for this food in addition to this beer. So that was causing saloons to start bleeding cash. And in 1906, when the Dowel Law tax was increased, it was originally $350 a year and it went up to $1,000.
Holy moly.
A lot of saloons were forced to close their doors. I think in here he mentions how much of a like jump that was.
I mean, if you're selling beer, a pint of beer for 5 cents a pop, $1,000 a year is a lot.
So that's about $25,000 today. So
well, at the time of the publishing.
At the time of the publishing, which this is actually not a super old book, published in 2019. So it's probably maybe closer to like 28,000 or something like that today. But
so to make up for $1,000 of taxes, you would have to serve 20,000 pints of beer,
which doesn't even include your cost for the keg
at 5 cents a pop.
Yeah. So, since the Dowel Law tax increased so much, a lot of saloons were forced to close their doors. Unfortunately for the city, the sleaziest saloons were often the ones that were turning enough profit to pay the new tax increase, causing the smaller saloons to close. So some saloons were still subsidized by breweries, but not every saloon could be subsidized by a brewery. So Hamilton County saw the number of saloons cut in about half, with approximately 1,600 paying the new tax. So before, we were talking about 2,100 businesses that paid originally during the Dowel Law tax, with another 800 to 900 that weren't. So approximately 3,000 to now 1,600.
So this is the same Dowel Law, but the tax increased?
Yes.
In 1906?
Yes.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and that's way more than a 100% increase, because it more than doubled how much you'd have to pay.
And they just did that without notice. There wasn't like a 5-year grace period.
Nope, no 5-year grace period
or whatever, or something where you work your way up to 1,000. It was just last year I paid $350 in taxes, and this year, without warning, I'm paying $1,000.
Your government at work. So in 1908, Ohio's alcohol producers were advocating to bring back the liquor license system. This is when they were kind of starting to get up on like, hey, maybe we should do something about this. This is maybe a problem.
It sounds like the point of these laws and regulations is to close businesses.
Yes, but it's having the opposite effect of, oh, hey, it's going to take me less startup capital to open a business because, yeah, I need a storefront and I need furniture for that storefront, but the brewery is going to help me get furniture for that storefront because I'm going to sell their product. But now I don't have to worry about that pesky liquor license.
Yeah.
And renewing that every year. That's one less fee that I have to worry about.
But it sounds like the state is passing these regulations.
Correct.
In order to close saloons, but they're so incompetent that they don't realize that They're closing the wrong saloons
Exactly.
because they don't understand what's going on.
Because the sketchiest ones are the ones that are going to have the money to actually continue to stay open.
But if you and I were operated a honest saloon back then, we would be SOL.
Correct. Which is a lot of the small businesses were a lot of the small saloons were the ones that closed down.
Wow, it's
wild. So in 1808, they're trying to advocate to bring back the liquor license system because this would reduce the number of saloons to better match the area's population and potentially get rid of some bad apples. This was an attempt to clean things up to reduce the calls for statewide prohibition. Because, the temperance movement, they've got some ammunition now. A lot of the saloons that are open are also operating gambling and prostitution, which is a big no-no.
But they closed the honest businesses.
Yep.
Because of taxes.
Yeah. So, even still, brewers were helping to open more saloons, adding to the problem, citing no regulations as their reason. So, as I'm saying, hey, we should regulate this a bit and bring back the liquor license, I'm helping 5 businesses over here open up. So, it was estimated that 50% of the saloons in Hamilton County were brewery backed.
At this point.
At this point, yeah. Now, this is based on who was actually paying the taxes. So breweries were the ones paying the taxes for 50% of the saloons. Now, this was low compared to Indianapolis, which was about 75%. So we were a little better. But again, the big problem was the other illegal activities that were happening in the saloons. And other brewery owners were warning that continuing to support these activities, even if not directly, could be the thing that helps the prohibition movement stick. So there was a big Brewers Association conference, like a countrywide one, and a brewery was like, hey, y'all need to be cautious about what's actually happening in your saloons, because even if you're not directly funding these activities, you're not saying that this isn't okay. You need to say that this isn't okay. One of the super sketchy ones was actually owned by a Cincinnati City Council member and
of course
had super crazy quote unquote sitting rooms and was probably one of the worst in the cities. And the temperance movement, they kind of started to get more wise, and they were trying to close down businesses based on the other illegal activities they were doing. So for the gambling and the prostitution, and some of the people on the Brewers Association were also part of those temperance movements. And they're like, yeah, shut down this council member guys first, because his is literally the worst. Super sketch things are happening here. We can ignore all of the ones that are semi-brewery owned for the time being, because we want to get rid of his that's really, really bad first, and then we'll work on getting rid of the rest of them.
I heard, and this is my own truth, but I heard that city councilman's back in the day, his saloon was called French Laundry.
I actually cut this out because I didn't know if we'd have time to talk about it, and now we're talking about it anyway. So it was the Ohio Brewers Vigilance Bureau. It was an alliance to investigate immoral behavior. So on State Street, just a block away from the Capitol in Columbus, was the first place that they closed down. But Majestic Concert Hall on Vine Street was the place that was owned by a Cincinnati councilman.
AKA French Laundry.
Yep, because their quote, too, was that the worst places in town were, quote, within a stone's throw of police headquarters. Because they were everywhere. No one cared until they cared. So, in 1912, brewers got what they wanted with the restitution of liquor licenses.
So the brewers
wanted liquor licenses to come back, because once liquor license went away, everything just super exploded. Well, now you've got too many places that are open. If I've got 6 different saloons that I'm selling 5-cent beers to, that are selling 5-cent beers, they're not necessarily generating enough traffic individually to turn a profit, versus if I just had 3 saloons that were slinging those beers.
Right.
So I've got too many storefronts. It's getting ridiculous. So, unfortunately, just like with the temperance movement, this didn't work out for them like they had wanted. It was some more surprised Pikachu faces. So
Please regulate us, government.
Daddy government, I need your help.
And they were surprised that it didn't work out the way they wanted.
Yep.
Okay.
So the number of saloons was capped at 1 per 500 people in the population, plus character qualifications were added. So like, hey, if you've been to jail, you can't get a liquor license, because like that was not a thing before. And operating gambling and or prostitution in conjunction with a liquor license would cause that license to be revoked. So they could take away your liquor license if you were doing other things in addition to selling liquor, like other illegal things. For the most part, the brewers were fine with all those regulations because sweet, that is kind of what we want. We want to get this a little more reputable. We want to reduce the number that are open. But what also happened was this new law that they passed got rid of tied houses. Like they completely abolished it. So I, as a brewery, could no longer support a saloon. So this caused more issues in other parts of Ohio than it did in Cincinnati, since more businesses in Cincinnati owned their own equipment. So about basically in cities like Toledo, breweries owned a lot of the equipment that was actually inside of the saloons.
Okay.
But in Cincinnati, a lot more of the saloons owned their own equipment. That's kind of like what it comes down to.
Okay.
But the cap on the number of businesses caused almost 550 saloon owners to be denied a license. Most accepted their fate and changed their business practices, but approximately 100 continued to stay open in defiance of the law, which was largely ignored in Cincinnati because Cincinnati gonna Cincinnati. Until 1913 when the governor stepped in and was like, yo, we gotta shut this down. So, I mean, that gave them like 4 years. No, that was only 1 year. Whoops. They had like a year. And while tied houses were still illegal, brewers would support saloons under the table. So like, I'm still going to support you, but we no longer have a written agreement about this and we don't tell anybody else about it. And liquor licenses sold an almost 100% increase on the resale market. So if you had a liquor license and you're like, I don't really feel like selling anymore, you could sell your license and turn a big profit.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So by 1916, a lot of the stuff had calmed down and brewers reduced the alcohol. So like fewer saloons were open, breweries were less involved directly with saloons, and in addition, brewers decided to reduce the alcohol content of their beverages from 7% ABV to 4% ABV. Part of that was to remarket their beverages as healthier and make it for sure better than hard liquor. They were wanting to halt or reverse the continuing march towards prohibition, but would it be enough?
Bum, bum, bum.
Left y'all on a cliffhanger. Who knows?
Yeah, so the plan is to continue this story. It's a 3-part story.
This
at least a 3-part story.
5-part trilogy.
5-part trilogy of Prohibition in Cincinnati before, during, and after.
Yep.
And this is, again, can you read the title of the book and the author?
So this is Cincinnati Beer by Michael D. Morgan, published in 2019. And he's got a few books.
Is he the guy with the hat?
Maybe. I want to say this is the same guy who started Bachfest.
Bachfest, yeah.
Or who made Bachfest like a thing. Yes, this is the guy who like made Bachfest a thing. And he was one of the ones that went with Urban Artifact to figure out the yeast for Missing Link.
Yeah, okay.
Because he's got pictures of that in here too.
Okay.
And he helped with the brewery trail and stuff like that.
So he's a historian, and what chapter in this book did this cover?
Specifically, most of this information comes from the chapter, Why Somebody Had to Make a Law Against It.
Is there a number to this chapter?
Let me see if they give a number. Nope, but 1, 2, 3, 4.
3 days later.
13. It's chapter 13.
Okay, so if you want to read more about this, you
can get the book from the library, but they have one fewer copy available at the moment.
And what is the name of the book again?
Cincinnati Beer by Michael D. Morgan.
And this information is in chapter 13.
Correct. Why someone had to make a law against it.
And
why they had to make a law against it.
We will do part 2 soon, but probably not next week. So
probably not.
So you will have a few weeks to think about this cliffhanger. Will it be enough?
We'll have to see. Maybe they can stop Prohibition. Maybe they can stop the temperance movement. Time will tell.
So now it is time for Joe's dad joke of the week. And surprise, surprise, I found a joke that is Prohibition themed.
I mean, you are very good about staying on topic. I appreciate that.
Well, I do the hard research.
Yes, you do.
So are you ready for this?
I am as ready as I'll be.
All right. So where did Prohibition era rodents get their alcohol? And I'm not talking about politicians.
I don't know. Where?
The squeak easy.
That's cute.
Because it's like the speakeasy.
Yeah. They squeak.
So that does it for this week's show. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Craft Parenting Podcast. You can also get a hold of us via email, which is craftparentingpodcast@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. Make sure to share the show. That's what helps our show grow. If you'd like to send us stuff such as fan mail, pineapples, craft supplies, or sanity if you happen to have any lying around, we have a P.O. Box.
And that P.O. Box, along with a bunch of information, is available on our website, which is www.craftparentingpodcast.com.
That's where we post the show notes. Plus, there's lots of new blog posts about some of the stuff that doesn't make it into the podcast.
And if you are so inclined, you may follow me personally on Instagram at craftparentingjoe, and they can follow your side hustle.
My side hustle is Caroline Creates Crafts.
Caroline's Creative Crafts.
So on Instagram, I'm Caroline Creates Crafts. On Facebook, I am Caroline's Creative Crafts. I need to post more with the side hustle, but I also need to finish the blanket for Stephen and Hillary's baby. So I'm going to work on that tomorrow, which is almost today.
Yeah, we need to get it done for sure. And with that, I'm Joe.
And I'm Caroline.
See you next time on the Craft Parenting Podcast.
What up, what up?
The roasty aroma of coffee. Hold on.
Oh my goodness, the ABV is getting to you.
I know.
I mean, fortunately, we don't have any hard words to say in this, but there's a lot of talking in this episode.
Okay, so the roasty aroma, the roasty... oh my goodness. Was that closed?
Yeah, the kids do that. I noticed that yesterday, and I just forgot to fix it, so I decided to fix it. The kids like to play with the vents.
Yeah, no wonder why it's so cold.
I know. Hooligans.